The story begins with a man named Ryan Grace who has just woken up from a coma. Completely losing his memory, Grace panics when an automated machine tries to force him toward the medical room.
Restored.
As he breaks free and reaches the top of a flight of stairs, he looks out and realizes that he is currently in outer space. While Grace desperately tries to remember who he is, the ship's robotic system introduces itself as Mary and attempts to communicate with him. Mary explains that Grace's two crewmates have already died on this ship, and she adds that it will take 11 years to return to planet Earth. Hearing this news, Grace is deeply shaken. He even finds himself shocked by his own subconscious abilities as he instinctively recognizes various complex instruments around the spacecraft. Without even realizing it, Grace accurately calculated the transit time needed to return to Earth. Mary's calculation was correct, as the journey will indeed take around 11 years based on the remaining fuel on the ship. As Grace continues to push his mind to recover his identity, a flash of memory suddenly returns to him. He remembers that he used to be a school teacher. In that memory, one of his students was curious about the Petrova line, which was discovered 2 years prior by a Russian scientist named Irina Petrova. In the classroom, Grace explained that the Petrova line is nothing more than a collection of red material dots stretching from the Sun to Venus. However, deep down, Grace knew the terrifying truth that this phenomenon was slowly consuming the Sun's energy, causing it to dim day by day. Even so, the past version of Grace remained confident that Earth would be fine because NASA would surely gather the brightest minds from around the world to solve the crisis. Back on the spacecraft, Grace tidies himself up and tries to remember his two deceased crewmates by examining the personal belongings he finds scattered throughout the ship. These fragmented memories, returning piece by piece, are the key to unlocking the entire truth behind his interstellar journey. He recalls a moment from his past when a NASA envoy named Eva arrived to meet him. Eva introduced herself as the leader of the Petrova task force. She was well aware that Grace had been ostracized by the scientific community due to an arrogant research paper he had written in which he claimed that water was not essential for the evolution of life. Because of that controversy, Grace had been forced to leave high-level research and work as a simple school teacher. However, Eva offered him a chance to return to his field as a scientist because NASA had just successfully captured a sample of the Petrova material from space the night before. As a molecular biologist, Grace was the perfect person to analyze it. Instead of feeling honored as the first human to touch the alien substance, Grace felt as though he was being used as a scapegoat by the government officials observing his work. Brushing his doubts aside, Grace proceeded with his analysis. He was shocked to discover that the composition of this alien cell completely contradicted his own arrogant hypothesis. The cell was predominantly composed of hydrogen and oxygen, which are the exact components of water. Grace theorized that these cells survived by consuming thermal energy and moved by radiating heat, which created the infrared effect observed stretching from Venus to the Sun. The cells were constantly traveling back and forth to feed on the Sun's energy in order to reproduce. However, one major question remained: why had Venus become the specific home for these cells? After persistently convincing Eva of his theories, Grace was finally granted permission to join the research project on a much deeper level.
Due to its unique characteristics, the alien cell is officially named astrophage. Dozens of scientists are recruited to study it, including Grace. Alongside a guard assigned by Eva, Grace constructs a laboratory model that replicates the atmosphere of the planet Venus. However, the moment Grace triggers a light source, the 3 astrophage cells in his possession instantly try to escape. Grace is forced to plunge his laboratory into total darkness to prevent the cells from fleeing the room. While standing in the dark, Grace is absolutely shocked to discover that his 3 astrophage cells have suddenly become 4. Through this event, Grace realizes exactly how the organism reproduces. Upon hearing this major breakthrough, authorities immediately transport Grace via a military fighter jet to meet with Eva. Eva guides Grace into a briefing room to stand before the brightest minds from around the world, all of whom had joined the project much earlier than him. In that moment, Grace is asked to explain the reproductive system of the astrophage. In reality, NASA already knows how the organism multiplies. They also already know why the astrophage thrives on Venus, which is because the planet is rich in the carbon dioxide required for its reproduction. Nevertheless, NASA is deeply impressed that Grace managed to uncover these facts using only rudimentary tools. From that moment on, EVA officially recruits Grace into a highly classified initiative they call Project Hail Mary. Through this briefing, a terrifying truth is revealed, where the astrophage is not only consuming the sun, but is also devouring the light of almost every star in the universe. However, researchers have discovered one exception. A star named Tau Ceti remains completely untouched by the astrophage. When Grace asked why this is happening and what makes Tau Ceti immune, the scientists give a surprising answer. In truth, none of them know the reason. That mystery is the exact reason why Project Hail Mary was formed, and it explains why they are mass breeding the organism. It turns out that astrophage is an incredibly potent energy source. The scientists believe that if they can harvest 2 million kilograms of astrophage to fuel an interstellar spacecraft, a journey to Tau Ceti will not have to take 11 years. However, Grace immediately faces a moral dilemma when he realizes that the astronauts sent to Tau Ceti will essentially be embarking on a one-way suicide mission. Back in deep space, with half of his memories restored, Grace begins to identify the two bodies inside the Hail Mary spacecraft. They are the pilot, Commander Yao from China, and the Russian engineer, Olesya. Grace pays his final respects for their bravery for embarking on this suicide mission, even though he still cannot remember why a rebellious scientist like himself agreed to fly on this journey in the first place. With no other choice, Grace releases both bodies into the vacuum of space for a proper cosmic burial. Shortly after, Mary informs him that the spacecraft is beginning to enter the orbit of Tau Ceti. Despite not being the official pilot, Grace does his best to control the ship. He observes that the red Petrova line reaches all the way to Tau Ceti, proving that the astrophage has indeed anchored itself around this star system. Yet, for some unknown reason, the light energy of Tau Ceti remains completely untouched by the organism. Before Grace can solve this puzzle, he is shocked by the sudden appearance of another spacecraft right next to his own. Panicking, Grace tries everything he can to steer away from the alien ship, but the mysterious vessel effortlessly mirrors his every move. His panic escalates when Mary reports that the alien has launched an object directly toward the Hail Mary. Grace initially suspects the object is a bomb, but when it fails to detonate, his scientific curiosity gets the better of him. He puts on his spacesuit and steps outside to retrieve the object. After nearly drifting away into the void, Grace successfully captures the cylinder, celebrating his victory with a small dance.
Back inside, Grace inspects the alien object and discovers that it is merely a container. At first glance, the items inside look like simple metal rods resembling small sticks. However, using his sharp intellect, Grace realizes that the structural arrangement of these rods indicates the alien originates from a planet in the Eridani system. Deducing that the alien is trying to introduce itself, Grace uses a similar physical model to show Earth as his home planet and launches it back as a reply. From that moment on, Grace and the alien continue to exchange messages until a transmission indicates that the alien plans to build a connecting tunnel between their two ships. Gathering his courage, Grace walks through the bridge. For the very first time, he touches the hull of an extraterrestrial ship. When Grace taps on the viewing glass, he is startled to see the alien's true form, which resembles a moving pile of stones. Grace is even more surprised to discover that this alien possesses a sense of humor. The creature displays a small model mimicking Grace's celebratory dance from earlier, before gesturing for Grace to return to his ship for a moment. When the tunnel reconnects, Grace is astonished to find that the corridor has been pressurized. The alien has deliberately adjusted the atmosphere inside the bridge to match human needs, signaling this by using a twin circle model to represent the presence of O2, or oxygen. Realizing the air is safe, Grace takes a deep breath and removes his helmet. Through another model crafted by the alien, Grace realizes that the Petrova line is what brought both of them to this exact location. Understanding that they share the exact same mission to save their home planets, Grace begins searching for a way to establish a shared language so they can communicate. To bridge the gap between them, Grace creates a communication device that translates the alien's language into words he can easily understand. He makes sure to document every step of this experience so that Eva and the other scientists back on Earth will know about this breakthrough. Grace names the alien's remarkably durable metallic material Xenonite, and because of his rocky, stone-like appearance, he decides to name his new alien friend Rocky. After gathering thousands of words and successfully converting them into a shared vocabulary, Grace and Rocky can finally communicate. Through their long conversations, their bond grows much stronger. Grace is deeply moved upon learning that Rocky is the sole survivor of a 23-member crew that departed from planet Eridani to study Tau Ceti. Rocky himself has no idea what caused the sudden deaths of his crewmates. Feeling a shared sense of fate as lonely survivors, the two officially form a duet dedicated to saving the universe. To make their interactions even smoother, Grace converts Rocky's translated words into an automated voice system. Exhausted from his hard work, Grace finally decides to close his eyes for some well-deserved rest. While Grace sleeps, his mind drifts back to a memory of his first meeting with the primary astronauts chosen for the suicide mission, along with the backup crew standing right behind them. During that briefing, Grace demonstrated the incredible power of astrophage energy, showing the team how just 1 single gram of the material could power a device to melt an entire ton of solid steel. At the end of the meeting, Grace praised Commander Yao for his immense bravery in sacrificing his life for humanity, contrasting it with his own desire to stay safe on Earth.
When Grace wakes up, Rocky gives him a huge surprise. Unable to resist his curiosity to explore the human ship, Rocky has crafted his very own Eridani-style spacesuit to step across the boundary. Grace is initially annoyed by this unexpected intrusion and firmly reminds Rocky that even though they share the same goal, they must maintain strict boundaries and remain in their respective vessels. Hearing this, Rocky displays a stubborn but playful attitude. He ends up staying inside Grace's ship for quite some time, even setting up a temporary habitat for himself. During his stay, the mystery of how Rocky's crew died is finally solved. They passed away due to space radiation, but Rocky survived because his workbench happened to be right next to the astrophage sample room. Without anyone realizing it, the astrophage had acted as a natural shield that protected Rocky from the lethal radiation. With the mystery solved, Grace and Rocky formulate a plan to harvest samples directly from Tau Ceti to discover why this specific star system is immune to the astrophage. They calculate that they will arrive at the planet in about 11 days. Throughout the remainder of the journey, the universe's ultimate savior duet spends their time in the simulation room. Grace shows Rocky the breathtaking beauty of planet Earth, and they share stories about their respective homeworlds. Rocky proudly mentions that he has a partner back home, and even shares her name. Hearing Rocky's heartwarming story triggers another memory for Grace, bringing back a past conversation with Eva, where he finally understands why the Project Hail Mary astronauts threw a party despite knowing their lives would end on this mission. Shortly after, Tau Ceti appears clearly right in front of them. Grace floats outside in the vacuum of space, while Rocky acts as his makeshift pilot, giving directions to guide him. They carefully enter the red Petrova line to harvest the sample, where it becomes obvious that millions of astrophage cells are what actually form this crimson path. As the first intelligent beings to ever get this close to the system, they feel they have the right to give this otherwise boring planet a proper name. Inspired by the movie Rocky Balboa, which they had watched together earlier, Grace and Rocky decide to name the planet Adrian, matching the name of Rocky's wife in the film. Through a series of tests, Rocky realizes that there is a natural form of life on planet Adrian that actively feeds on the astrophage cells landing there. This predator is the exact reason why planet Adrian remains untouched by the solar crisis.
Before the astrophage can consume the light energy of the star system, this native alien cell hunts and devours the astrophage first. Since the Hail Mary is not designed to safely enter Adrian's atmosphere, the duo plans to maintain a distance of 5 kilometers above it. They intend to capture samples from the planet using a method similar to fishing in open water, prompting Rocky to forge a long chain that will serve as their fishing line. For this specific event, Rocky wants to be the one to document the plan for the scientists back on Earth. Up until this point, Rocky had assumed that Grace was speaking live to the scientists on his home planet. In reality, Grace explains that he is only saving the video recordings to a data drive. He will send these files back to Earth inside a small Beetle capsule once the mission is complete. He reveals that his ship does not have enough fuel to make the return journey to Earth, meaning he will only survive until his food supply runs out or until the ship's life support loses power entirely. Hearing this heartbreaking truth, Rocky refuses to accept that his comrade's mission must end in death. Even though Grace cannot read Rocky's alien facial expressions, he can feel the sincere grief radiating from his friend. Upon learning about Grace's inevitable fate, Rocky makes an incredibly generous offer. He is willing to share 2 million kilograms of the astrophage fuel from his own ship. Even though this sacrifice means Rocky's own return journey to planet Eridani will be delayed by an extra 6 years, he does it willingly. Rocky risks everything just so Grace doesn't have to sacrifice his life, ensuring his human friend can finally return home to Earth.
In truth, Grace only begins to accept his fate after finally remembering the dark reality of how he ended up on this spacecraft. He knew deep down that he would never willingly sacrifice his life for any mission. To reveal the truth, his memory takes us back to a moment exactly 3 days before the primary astronauts were scheduled to depart for Tau Ceti. While Grace was presenting his latest research data to Eva, a catastrophic laboratory explosion occurred, instantly killing the 3rd crew member along with the entire backup astronaut squad. This tragedy left only Commander Yao as the pilot and Olesia as the engineer, leaving the interstellar mission without its crucial 3rd member, a scientist. Because time was running out, NASA could not afford to screen a replacement, let alone train a completely new scientist from scratch. Consequently, every eye in the briefing room immediately turned toward the only person who already knew everything about the project. The person they chose was none other than Grace. With his unparalleled expertise regarding the Petrova line and the astrophage, Grace was undeniably the perfect candidate for the journey. However, as his memories fully return, he remembers that he fiercely rejected the assignment from the very beginning, outright refusing to throw his life away on a suicide mission. It turns out that Eva took matters into her own hands. She unilaterally decided to force Grace into the mission regardless of his desperate protests. Under her command, guards and military personnel forcefully restrained Grace, drugged him with a heavy sedative, and placed him into the coma bays inside the Hail Mary spacecraft. This dark memory finally explains why, when Grace first woke up at the beginning of the film, he found himself alone in deep space with his 2 crewmates already deceased. The time finally arrives for them to harvest the sample from planet Adrian. Rocky launches his long chain, which has a specialized containment pouch attached to the end, designed to automatically capture the native cells. Meanwhile, Grace prepares to head toward the ship's lower hull to operate the chain's winch system manually. Standing out there, Grace witnesses the spacecraft nearly catching fire as the hull struggles to withstand the intense atmospheric friction and immense gravity of planet Adrian. Despite the danger, Grace successfully retrieves the sample pouch. However, a sudden crisis occurs that nearly costs him his life when he almost drops the containment pouch. Even though Rocky desperately yells at him to let it go, Grace summons his courage and leaps to rescue the sample. He manages to secure the pouch and returns to the safety of the cabin, just in time allowing them to escape Adrian's orbit as fast as possible. Unfortunately, their relief is short-lived as several fuel tank compartments begin leaking. Grace is forced to eject the compromised tanks one by one, but the loss of fuel severely disrupts the ship's automated gravity stabilization system. The shifting gravitational forces become so violent that Grace is pinned forcefully against the cabin wall and loses consciousness. Seeing his friend in mortal danger, Rocky steps out of his protective environmental sphere. He bravely braves the lethal human atmosphere to eject the remaining leaking tanks and restore the ship's gravity system, before dragging Grace to the medical bay. Rocky does this knowing his own body cannot survive prolonged exposure to the human ship's air without protection. When Grace finally wakes up, the ship is stable but heavily damaged, and he finds Rocky back inside his dome, completely motionless and hardened like stone. Not knowing if his friend is alive or dead, Grace leaves Rocky to recover naturally according to his alien physiology.
During this time, Grace analyzes the harvested sample and discovers that the cell is a type of microbe that feeds exclusively on astrophage. With this discovery, Grace finally has the solution to prevent the astrophage from consuming the sun and save Earth from extinction. He names this miracle microbe Taumiba. Grace records a final message for the scientists on Earth while speaking to the still motionless Rocky. He provides instructions to mass breed the Taumiba to halt the solar crisis. However, Grace initially panics when he discovers that Taumiba cannot survive exposure to nitrogen. This is where Rocky's civilization proves vital, as the alien metal xenonite is completely impervious to nitrogen and can act as the perfect shield to protect the microbes. After Grace spends days talking to his silent friend, he eventually falls asleep from exhaustion. It turns out that Rocky was merely in a deep hibernation to heal his damaged body, and he finally wakes up. With the universe officially saved, the duo decides to celebrate with a farewell party. Before parting ways, Grace takes a brief tour inside Rocky's ship, marking the final moments of their incredible partnership. Rocky praises Grace as the bravest human he has ever met, jokingly adding that Grace is also the only human he has ever met. Fueled by the astrophage supply gifted by Rocky, Grace sets his course for home, with the journey back to Earth now taking only 4 years. However, mid-journey, Mary triggers a contamination alarm. Grace inspects the cargo bay and discovers that the Taumiba microbes have reproduced rapidly and evolved, allowing them to eat through the xenonite container. Luckily, Grace catches it early and patches the leak, but he realizes a terrifying truth. Rocky's entire ship is built from xenonite, meaning the rapidly evolving Taumiba will soon breach his ship and consume his astrophage, leaving Rocky to perish slowly in deep space. Without hesitation, Grace places all his research data, instructions, and healthy Taumiba samples into a beetle capsule and launches it toward Earth. Instead of returning to his home planet, Grace turns the Hail Mary around to save his best friend. 56 days later, Grace arrives back at Rocky's ship, finding the alien weak from radiation after the Taumiba caused a massive fuel leak. Grace successfully saves Rocky, fully repaying the debt of his own life. Back on Earth, the capsule arrives safely, and Eva mobilizes the world's scientists to mass breed the Taumiba and release them into the sun, completely cleansing it of the astrophage threat. Years pass, and we see Grace teaching a classroom once again. However, he is not on Earth. Grace has chosen to live on planet Eridoni to remain close to his friend. Rocky arrives to inform him that the Eridoni scientists have developed a new technology that can send Grace back to Earth in a fraction of the time. Yet, Grace smiles and decides to stay on the alien planet just a little while longer to extend his journey with Rocky. And that is the end of the story.